Good morning, Ms. Rangata. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Today, Chair, for me is a very quick one. On the 15th of June, before Chair, there was an application for cross-examination under SEQ 17-2021, an application brought by Mr. Buthelezi to cross-examine Mr. Sex and Mr. Bobo Molefe. During the application, Chair has made a proposition for the parties to consider a discussion as to how the matter can be resolved. So Chair has directed that Advocate Ngalwana, who appeared on behalf of the applicant, to be in contact with Advocate Soni to engage as to the issues or the questions that were raised in Buthelezi's affidavit. I'm here to confirm, Chair, that yesterday on the 16th, the two advocates confirmed that the agreement be reached. I'm not sure if the letter should be read into the record, or I can just confirm that the parties have agreed to call the two parties at a later stage so that the issues that were outstanding as raised by the applicant to be dealt with.
As I understand the position, the evidence leader, Mr. Soni, proposed that the two witnesses be recalled and so that he could put to them Mr. Buthelezi's version.
Yes, Chair.
And ask such further questions as he may deem necessary.
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
And it will be after that exercise that Mr. Buthelezi's legal team will decide whether they want to pursue the application for leave to cross-examine or not.
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm happy with that arrangement.
Thank you, Chair.
So that is what will be done.
So in essence, the application is postponed pending what the Chair has just mentioned?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Chair. The application
Chair.
is postponed. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I be excused, Chair?
You are excused.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayberg.
Good morning, Chairperson.
Before we start, I just want to make some announcements. The Commission did not have hearings from, I think, the 2nd of June up to the 14th. And its term is coming to an end at the end of June. And I think there are a lot of people who wish to know what is happening with regard to the Commission completing its work and what is happening with the return to the Commission of the President. So I think it's necessary that I make some announcement and explain where the Commission is. When the Commission applied for the extension of its term from the end of March to the end of June, I had made an assessment that we would be able to complete the hearing of oral evidence by end of March, and that April, May, and June would be used for the preparation of the report. As it turned out, we did not complete the hearing of oral evidence at the end of March. And In part, that would be because, one, when one hears evidence in a forum such as this, there are witnesses and lawyers who need to be accommodated within certain reasonable limits. And two, one's assessment can never be absolutely accurate. And as one proceeds, sometimes one becomes aware of some evidence or matters that one may not have been aware of. So the fact of the matter is the assessment that was made in good faith, but it just didn't work out. The evidence that still needed to be heard at the end of, beyond the end of March was very important evidence. It included the evidence of former senior executives of SOEs such as Transnet and ESCOM. It included the evidence, I think, of a former chairperson of the Denel board that was appointed in 2015. It included the evidence relating to parliamentary oversight. It included the evidence of the ANC that was given by its national chairperson and former Secretary General, Mr. Gwede Mantashe, and by the president of the ANC. It included evidence relating to a former minister of the Department of Public Enterprises, Mr. Malusi Gigaba. It included the evidence relating to serious allegations of the looting of public funds in the State Security Agency, which I, as the chairperson of the commission, considered to be quite important for the commission to hear. So it was necessary that the commission should continue to hear that evidence. It had that evidence in April and May. Some of that evidence is still being heard and will be heard until the end of June. During the time that the commission has not been sitting from beginning of June, that time has enabled us to carefully look at the work that has been, or the ground that has been covered by the commission in the various work streams. And I'm able to say that as things stand, subject to one qualification, we should have had all oral evidence by the end of June that the commission considers to be important. I said this is subject to one qualification. That qualification is that there are about 5 or 6 witnesses that the commission has identified as important to be called to the commission before the commission can properly conclude the hearing of oral evidence. That is apart from the president, because the president must still come back. The President and the Commission had previously tentatively identified the 29th of June and the 30th of June as the days when the President would return to the Commission to complete his evidence in his capacity as the President of the ANC and to give evidence in his capacity as President of the country and former Deputy President of the country. But the 5 or 6 witnesses or implicated persons that have said the Commission has identified will not be able to give evidence during June. Therefore, it means that by the end of June, we will still be needing some days to hear the evidence of those 5 or 6 witnesses and the evidence of the President before we can finally conclude oral evidence. We are going to be applying to the High Court to get more time so that we can complete the work of the Commission properly. If the High Court grants us an extension, we will be able to hear the evidence of those 5 or 6 witnesses in July, as well as the evidence of the President, hopefully before or not later than 15 July. And once we have had the evidence of those 5 or 6 witnesses and the evidence of the President, then that should conclude the hearing of oral evidence of the Commission, which started in August 2018. In the course of this morning, I will sign the affidavit that must form part of the application papers that must be launched in the High Court, where the Commission will ask the High Court for an extension of time. We are going to ask for an extension of time from the end of June up to the end of September. My assessment is that the preparation of the report should be complete by the end of August, but I would like to have September just in case we don't complete the report at the end of August. A lot of work has been going on for quite some time of summarizing and analyzing the evidence. That will facilitate the preparation of the report. I know that some within the public have grown very impatient with the Commission, demanding that it should complete its work. Some of the people who say that do so in good faith, but others do so for their own reasons. I am very keen that the work of the Commission be completed as soon as possible. I have a very dedicated team in the Commission, all of whom are working very hard to try and make sure that the work of the Commission is completed as soon as possible. In this regard, I'm speaking about the members of the legal team. I speak about members of the investigation team. I speak about the Secretariat and all the staff of the Commission. Everybody has watched and seen how everybody in the Commission has been working very hard, including sessions in the evenings and sittings on Saturdays and on public holidays. Because they are all very committed that the work of the Commission be done and completed as soon as possible. I'm also grateful to very many members of the legal profession, advocates and attorneys who appear on behalf of various persons who have given this Commission cooperation and have appeared in evening sessions. Everybody is working hard to try and assist the Commission. But the one thing that I will not do is this. I will not end the work of the Commission in an irresponsible manner. I'm going to repeat that. I will not end the work of the Commission in an irresponsible manner, just because I want to satisfy those who demand that the Commission should finish its work. When I started with this Commission, I made it quite clear that this Commission would do its work properly. That remains important. In seeking to complete the hearing of oral evidence, we will act properly, we will act in a responsible manner, we will not seek to act in a haphazard manner or abruptly. I have a responsibility to make sure that the work of the Commission is done properly. I have a responsibility to do my best to ensure that there is fairness to people who are implicated, and I intend to do my best to make sure that when we have finished the work of the Commission, we are able to look back and say we acted properly and we acted responsibly. Having said all of that, I'm happy that where we are is very close to finishing. As I say, by end of June, we will be left with about 5 or 6 witnesses, plus the President. Other than that, what will be left is the preparation of the report. So I thought it's important just to update the public as to where we are, and to also indicate that we will be launching, I believe today, our application in the High Court for the extension of the term of the Commission, so that the Commission can finish its work properly. That is the announcement I wanted to make. Yes, Mr. Maybeck.
Yes, thank you. Chairperson, today, this morning at least, has been scheduled for the continuation of the evidence of Mr. Singh within the Transnet stream. Mr. Singh is here. I presume we need to
Yes.
re-administer the oath of
administer the
affirmation.
oath and of affirmation. Good morning, Mr. Singh.
Good morning, Chair.
I've already greeted your legal team. Good morning. Thank you. I understand, Mr. Singh, that we all hope that this is your last day here.
Indeed, sir.
Yeah.
Please state your full names for the record.
Anoj Singh.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I do not. I do not.
Do you consider the oath binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. And just to make sure that there is clarity about what I announced. So the President is not going to appear before the Commission before the end of June. Another date will have to be arranged. That is because it's proper that the President should be the last witness to give evidence. So, and there are other witnesses that must still come before him. So he's not going to appear before the Commission on the 29th and 30th of June, but we will wait for the High Court to deal with our application. If it grants us the extension, then we will fix a date for the President and for the other witnesses, and that will be announced in due course. Of course, if the High Court does not grant us an extension, that will be that. Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Mr. Singh.
Good morning, sir.
At the end of the last sitting, we had been dealing with the acquisition of the 1064 locomotives. You'll recall that we dealt with the original business case, the alleged misrepresentation in relation to the increase in the ETC. We dealt with the role of regiments, and we had ended by dealing with the hurdle rate. I just want to pick up and end off in relation to the role of regiments, and perhaps what I'd like to do is just to show you some documents that may illustrate the role that they played. You've already given evidence and summarized what they did. Could I ask you please to pick out Transnet Bundle 4B. Transnet number 4B, Bundle 4B, has got a number of dividers in it. Could I ask you please to go to what I think should be the second last divider, and that is BB4H. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, so what you find at BB4H at page 795 is a supplementary affidavit of Mr. Callard. Are you there?
It's black numbers. No?
Sorry?
The black numbers.
Yes.
Yes.
795, black number.
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to take you through the affidavit. I want to actually show you the documents that are attached. Perhaps I could just, for context, take you to 799. What Mr. Callard deals with, paragraph 17 to 23, is the so-called regiment's price walk. And what he puts up is a number of documents emanating from regiments running from February 2014, you'll see that at paragraph 17, all the way through to paragraph 23. These are slides that form part of the presentation to the board in May 2014. But it's to the documents that I'd like to take you, Mr. Singh. Could you please go to page 816. Now you'll see in many instances what these documents comprise of are emails and then slide presentations. Now, at page 816, you see an email from Mr. or Ms. Gabriel Selassie, dated the 25th of February, and it's sent to Mr. Leher and Mr. Smith. They were persons assisting you in the post-tender negotiations, correct?
That is correct.
And you will see that often these emails are CC'd to, inter alia, Mr. Niven Pillay. You see that?
That is correct.
And the attachment here is summary slides. And if you go to page 817, you'll see it's dated the 25th of February 2014, and the slides are headed Transnet Financial and Risk Analysis for the 1064 procurement negotiations. I take it that, was this a slide presentation that was then made to you by regiments?
I don't recall the exact presentation, but I recall something like this.
All right. If I could then ask you to go to page 821, again from Gabriel Selassie, now the 6th of March. You'll see at 822 another slide presentation dated the 5th of March. Do you see that?
I see that.
And then if I could ask you to go to 826, this time from AJ Mystery from Regiments, the 7th of March, again to Messrs. Leher and Smith. The email says in the second paragraph, find attached for your review updated executive summary slides of the 1064 project. The summary has been updated to include the revised escalation drivers as requested. Do you see that?
That is correct.
And that slide presentation then appears over the page. You see that?
That is correct.
And then if you go to page 832, there's a further communication from Mr. Mystery. And another one at 833. And 833 reads, find attached for the updated executive summary slides for the 1064 project. Those slides you find commencing at page 834. You see that?
I see that, sir.
And so we go on. If you go to page 839, there's an email on 28 May. Please find attached the deck with the changes to the two last slides as requested. And those slides appear at 840. And then there's a different document at 848. It's put up by Mr. Callard, so-called Regiment's Price Walk, where you see how the price evolved from February through to May. Do you see that?
That is correct.
Then at 850, there's another slide presentation, this time dated 12 February from Regiments. And that's quite a lengthy deck, as it's called. It goes all the way to 878. And then if you can go to 880, on the 17th of February, another communication from Regiments to Leher and Smith. Attached are the slides showing that there's actually a net cost if you pay big deposits for the locos. And then there's slides attached to that. Do you see that?
So you're at 880.
880.
Yeah. 1 second. Okay, I'm there. That's correct.
And then at 886, another communication from Regiments, another slide presentation at 887. Those slides are dated 21 February 2014. You see that?
That's 886, no?
Sorry?
You're at 886?
I'm at 886, yes. And then if you go to 891, communication from regiments dated 25 February 2014. Now, this time it's addressed to you. Dear Anoj, my call earlier with Dani refers. Please find attached the Excel workbook that includes the total cash flows per year for the diesel and electric locomotives for the respective bidders. The cash flows are based on a maximum 50 locomotives delivery schedule. I hope this is in order. You see that?
I see that.
And then attached, presumably, is what is referred to as the Excel workbook at 892 and 893. Do you confirm that?
Yes, I see that.
And then if you go to 895, there's a further communication at the top of the page on the 5th of March. You see that?
Yes.
And then of importance, and this is really where I wanted to take you to, could I ask you please to have a look at 898? Because what we know is that the Board of Directors approved the increase in the ETC at a meeting on the 25th of May, 2014. And at 898, you see a communication from regiments dated the 21st of May, and the subject is summary slides for the report to the board. You see that?
I see that.
And it says, Dear Yusuf, please find attached the backup slides for your report to the board. Now, that report to the board, we know, is what we referred to previously as the ETC memo, correct, Mr. Singh?
The revised ETC.
Yeah. And then it says, in the slides on cost escalation, we have made an assumption that you have negotiated a flat cost escalation, in brackets, for CNR, CSR, and Bombardier, close brackets, as per the result of our model. Please do not hesitate to contact us should you need further information or clarification. Do you see that?
I see that.
And this time, this email is CC'd to Mr. Eric Wood. You see that?
That's correct.
And then the next day, if you go to page 900, on the 22nd of May, again to Mr. Leher, we've attached the summary slides with all the proposed changes. Should you require to include further changes, please send us your comments or suggestions as soon as possible. You see that?
I see that.
Now those slides you find commencing at page 901, dated the 21st of May. You see that?
I see that.
And then if I could take you finally, please, to page 909. And I'm sorry, I may have said that the meeting of the Board of Directors was on the 25th of May. It was, in fact, on the 28th of May. And this email at 909 is on the 29th of May. From Regiments, Gabriel Selassie, again, CC to Mr. Wood.
You said 29 May, it's written 28 May, is that right? Is that correct?
Yes, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
So it's the same day as the Board of Directors meeting, 28 May. I think where I said 9 is at page 909.
Okay.
Mr. Singh, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And what it says is, Dear Yusuf, I've had a discussion with Niven. Or I had discussion with Niven a few hours ago about the changes you would like us to make on the slides. You see that?
I see that.
So I assume that's Niven Pillay.
That's correct.
And it's CC'd to Mr. Wood. Is that right?
That is correct.
Those are the two people who are alleged to have done the deal with Mr. Essa in relation to the appointments of regiments that he would take 50 cents in the rand. You know that by now, correct?
That's correct.
All right. When you engage regiments, did you engage them on a confidential basis? That were they required to keep the information that they gained as your transaction advisors confidential?
I would assume so, sir.
And I assume that you would accept that given this conflict of interest that we've discussed, because there's no way of knowing whether regiments shared this information with Mr. Esser,
That's correct, sir.
and whether Mr. Esser in turn shared it with CNR and CSR.
That is correct.
When you do understand that in effect Mr. Esser was in a partnership with regiments, and at the same time, simultaneously on the evidence that's been led by money flows, he was in a partnership with CSR and CNR.
On evidence that you've
Yeah.
stated.
All right. And you've quite candidly said that, of course, on this evidence, regiments would have been wholly disqualified from being your transaction advisors, obviously. I don't mean on this evidence, I mean on the evidence that I've just sketched to you, the conflict of interest.
Had we known about it at
Yes,
that time? Yes.
they would have been wholly disqualified.
Yeah.
Just so that the transcript clearly reflects your answer was yes.
On had
what?
we known this
Yeah.
at the time when we engaged?
Yeah.
Now, we know that on the 6th of December 2012, we're now going back in time, an LOI was concluded between McKinsey and Transnet, where we saw that regiments replaced Letsema. Do you recall that?
On the 6th
6th December
2012, yes.
2012. And I'd asked you, you remember, some questions about whether in the run-up to that LOI, you had any dealings with...
This may have come across via a introduction via McKinsey, but I can categorically state that this was in no way, shape, or form due to the introduction by Mr. Esser.
Okay, why don't you just speak up a bit, please, if you don't
sorry,
mind.
sorry.
Or maybe just closer to the microphone.
Yes, I'm saying that this may have come across, or actually would have come across via an introduction from McKinsey. And my interactions with McKinsey at that time was primarily with Mr. Sega. So I would assume that it would have come about as a result of an introduction from himself. But I can categorically state that at this point, there was no interactions between myself and Mr. Esser relating to this meeting.
Okay, but then, so you say it came about as a consequence of an introduction by McKinsey.
That is correct.
But it's headed Meeting Repension Fund. What is that about?
I do not recall, sir.
Okay, then let me ask you, did you have this meeting with Mr. Pillay?
I do not recall the meeting, Mr. Chair.
All right. I mean, you know the history, I take it, in relation to regiments and the pension fund. You know what happened ultimately.
Sometimes after that, yes.
Yeah. I mean, regiments, you must correct me if I'm wrong, were appointed the administrator of the second defined pension fund. And
I don't know that.
And what happened is they disbursed for themselves 250 million from the pension fund. There was litigation that ensued, and they in fact paid it back. You know that.
I'm given to understand, yes.
So your evidence is, you see the mail, it appears that you agreed to a 10 o'clock meeting on 3 December, but you can't remember the meeting.
I don't recall it actually taking place. Not offhand, no.
So can you remember the first time that you met Mr. Niven Pillay?
No, sir.
All right.
Are there other times than the first one when you met?
Sorry, sir?
Are there other times other than the first one when you met him? In other words, Mr. Maibeck asked you whether you remember the first time you met him. You said no. I'm wondering whether that means you never met him, or that means you did meet him, but you don't remember the first time, but you do remember other times.
Well, Mr. Chair, subsequent to that, through the transaction advisory work, I obviously met Mr. Pillay.
Yeah.
But my first interactions with Mr. Pillay would have come about as a result of the introduction by McKinsey as their supply development partner. Prior to that, I don't think I had any interactions with regiments, Mr. Wood or Mr. Pillay.
Okay. Mr. Member.
Thank you. Let me then move to a different issue. I just want to ask your comment on one or two things before we move forward. Could you please turn up Exhibit BB27, that's the Transnet POI reference bundle. And can you go to page 184, please?
And this.
Now, this is something that we have already dealt with, but I, in fairness, just want you to have an opportunity to comment on it. If you have a look at paragraph 5.9.12.6, the second paragraph at page 184, this is part of the Fundutsi locomotive report. The finding is Malefe and Singh therefore misled the BADC into believing that the ETC of 38.6 billion excluded the relevant costs, and it was Singh who instructed Mohammadi change the business case to reflect that the relevant costs were excluded. Have you got any further comment to make on that?
I think, Mr. Chair, we've traversed this particular matter at the previous sessions at the Commission. Other than to say, other than to add to what has already been said, Mr. Chair, in this regard, the issue of presenting the revised variance to the board did not only occur, Mr. Chair, on the 28th of May 2014, as we would see here. The Board Acquisition and Disposal Committee, Mr. Chair, was presented with the final estimated cost of the locomotive contracts in February 2014. And at that meeting, Mr. Chair, the revised cost of the locomotives were disclosed to the Board Acquisition and Disposal Committee. And at that stage, Mr. Chair, if I recall correctly from memory, this was a meeting that happened in February 2014. I think it was the 26th of February 2014. And the revised contract value of the locomotives at that time was 52 billion. So the 38 to 55 escalation was disclosed to the board way before we concluded the contracts. And the reasons for the escalations were also disclosed to the Acquisition and Disposal Committee at the time. At that meeting, Mr. Chair, there was no indication that the board had disagreed with the fact that we had misled them. They were fully aware of the increases and the reasons for the increases, as we've discussed them in terms of the escalations, and the forex and the batch pricing, as well as the 52 billion, Mr. Chair, that I mentioned did not include the contingencies. Even when we presented to the board in May, Mr. Chair, the minutes will reflect that none of the board members actually queried or actually said that we were misleading them in any way, shape, or form. Which corroborates the original intention that I mentioned before is that the objective or the intention by including the words that we included was to convey the fact that the business case is subject to certain economic factors that will change over a period of time. And that was the original intention and only intention behind including those words. It was not meant to mislead, or it was not meant to, in any way, shape, or form, for any other intended purposes.
All right. So you deny any misrepresentation?
That is correct.
Can I just take you to page 187 and ask you to look towards the foot of the page? The second last paragraph, 5.9.12.21, according to the spreadsheet found in Mr. Garma's emails, Callard calculated the ETC of 38.6 billion, and he's given evidence about this. The table below indicates the breakdown of the 38.6 billion according to Callard, and you'll see in the table there's an amount of 1.7 million for Forex, and then over the page 2.775 for escalation and 2.232 for contingency. Do you see that?
I see that.
And then you will see under that table, as discussed earlier in the report, the ETC calculated by Callard included Forex, escalation and contingency fees amounting to 6.7 billion. Well, if you add up the three figures that I've just referred you to, you get to the 6.7, correct?
That is correct.
Then could I please take you back to your bundle 5C? And this time, if you could go right to the end, to page 2337. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Now, this is an email from a Mr. or Miss Huma from the DPE. At the foot of the page, sent on the 31st of March, addressed to you. Morning A. While we await Transnet's official response on the 100 locomotives, we have also noted that the Transnet media release on the procurement of 1064 indicated that the value of the transaction was about 50 billion. However, the department only approved 38.6 billion as per the Section 54 PFMA application. Why is there such a huge difference between what was approved and the actual transaction value? And will Transnet be making a formal submission to explain this difference to the minister? And you then respond, is that correct, on the same day? At the top of the page. Mr. Singh?
Yes, sir.
You responded at the top of the page.
Yes.
And you say, thanks for your email. Yes, indeed, the approval was for 38.6 billion, but excluded the impacts of foreign exchange and escalations. Well, that we know not to be correct.
In the context, yes.
And then the second last paragraph, you say, typically the above items are not included in the ETC, but they were in this ETC.
Yes, sir.
I see.
But I think in the context, Mr. Myberg, we'd have to read the full sentence. The full sentence, the context of the full sentence is that they are subject to economic conditions at the time of contracting and are not avoidable, and they are mere functions of the economic inputs at the time of contracting. So this again goes to the fact that they may have been included in the business case, but at an estimated value.
And then you go on to say, hope this helps, but will also provide to DPE a full report on the transaction once the BOD has approved sale.
That is correct.
And we know then that it was, well, the increase in the ETC was approved on 28 May 2014, correct?
That is correct.
2 months or so later.
That is correct.
Could I ask you please to go to Bundle 5B, your other file, Transnet Bundle 5B. And could I ask you to turn to page 977?
Nine, sir.
977.
And yes, sir.
So, Mr. Singh, this is the SACA finding, South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. It's a finding that was made in respect of a hearing in relation to you, and the sanction that was imposed is that you were excluded from membership of SACA, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Now, I just want to take you to paragraph 42, and I'm not going to go to each one of these paragraphs, and I'm not going to come back to this. But by way of illustration, we know that there were a number of findings made against you in relation to the 1064 transaction. You're aware of that?
Yes, sir.
And here is one that we're dealing with now, paragraph 42 at page 989. We therefore find Mr. Singh guilty of improper conduct in respect of charge 2 within the meaning of bylaws 34.2 by conducting himself grossly negligently in failing to ensure that the business case accurately and clearly stated that the initial costs of 38.6 billion included the potential effects from forex hedging, foreign escalation and other price escalation. Do you have any other comment? You've dealt with this already.
I think my comments have been commented.
Perhaps what I wanted to ask you, though, is why is it that you didn't participate in these proceedings?
Mr. Chair, I think I've been asked this question before, and it was based on legal advice that we did not participate in these proceedings.
It was based on legal advice
That we do not participate in these proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And is that legal advice that you're not prepared to share?
I'm going to object at this point, Chairperson. My learned friend knows as well as I do whatever transpired between Mr. Singh and his legal advisors are privileged.
Well, he hasn't demanded that he should share it. He has asked whether he's prepared to share it. And
But still, Chairperson, that's just another way of getting a witness without informing him of the consequences to waive his privilege, and I do object.
No. He obviously knows these things, and he just wanted to confirm that Mr. Singh would say whether he is prepared to share it or not. What was the answer, Mr. Singh?
Sorry, sir, I didn't hear.
Are you prepared to share it or not?
No, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Fair enough. Could I then
Mr. Chair, before we move off this point, Mr. Chair, I would like to just direct the Commission's attention to paragraph 43 on page 989.
Yes.
Basically, they conclude, which states, for paragraph 43 states, we accordingly make no finding in respect of charge 1, though we do express a view that we would have a difficulty in concluding that Mr. Singh was dishonest in misleading the BATC or the Transnet Board.
Yes.
I'm not going to take you through, there's a series of findings made against you here. You accept that? I mean, there's findings in relation to the hurdle rate, et cetera, et cetera. There's no, I mean, the point is that your evidence is your evidence. So insofar as there are findings made against you, you would take issue with them on the basis of the evidence that you've
That is
given.
correct.
There's no point in us going through the finding on a sort of a blow-by.
That is correct, yes.
All right.
You are obviously aware of the findings. You have read the ruling.
Yes, sir.
Yes. I thought I must ask because somebody else had testified that he had not read findings that had been made in another forum against him. So at least
No,
you
sir,
have
I
read, you are aware. Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right.
Chairperson, I see that it is 11:15. If you intend to take tea, this might be a convenient
Yes,
point.
let me take the tea break. The tea break might be longer than 15 minutes because I need to attend to something. But at the most, it should be 30 minutes. I hope it will be less than that. Okay. We adjourn. break, maybe at 5:30 for about 5 minutes or so, for me to complete what I need to complete.
So you'll tell me when.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Singh, I would like to, I think we were still in the bundle 5B file. Could I ask you, let me take you to page 694. That's the second money flows report that we've already dealt with. This is something arising from Mr. Peter's evidence that I would like your comment on. Now, you'll remember that the second money flows report deals, amongst other things, with the confinement of those 4 contracts to McKinsey. You remember that?
Yes.
And if you go to page 697, you see some reference to that at paragraph 8. Those are the contracts that we're familiar with: coal line contract, NMPP contract, etc. Now, the annexures to this report include the RFP submitted by McKinsey. But I want to take you to Annexure 3. If I could ask you please to turn to page 743.
743.
743. Annexure 3 comprises a few pages of emails. And perhaps in the interest of time, I can just take you to page 745. You'll see that this exchange of emails is between Indran Pillay of Regiments and Janine Kumar of McKinsey. And if you have a look at 745, at the foot of the page, or in the middle of the page, Kumar writes, "Hi Indran," and it's headed re-SD commitment. Now, this is in 13 June 2014. And what you see from these emails, Mr. Singh, is that this is a costing of the skills development component. That's what McKinsey and Regiments are interacting about. And she says, "Hope you are well. I've noticed that the contract values you are using are different to the contract values I have on my side. I have attached a spreadsheet highlighting the differences." You see that?
Yes.
And then the last paragraph says, "Once this has been done, please could you resend us the ST value summaries and your SD plans," so that supply development plans, etc. Then at the top of the page, you'll see that Mr. Pillay responds. He says, "Hi Janine," and his response is, "The numbers that I'm using is based on the Anoj memos to Brian regarding these projects. Does not include expenses." And you see that comes from him. Because if you turn to page 744, you see at the foot of the page, Pillay, 13 June to Kumar. Do you see that?
I see that, sir.
Now, what I just want to ask you about is when Mr. Peter gave evidence, he in fact alerted us to this. He made the point, as I recall, that this is highly irregular, that Regiments, in the form of Mr. Pillay, had the memos between yourself and Brian, assuming that to be Brian Malefe, in relation to these projects. They're memos that we went through before. Would you agree that it would be utterly irregular for them at this point in time, where they are looking to complete their RFP and to put in a tender, albeit on a confined basis, to have sight of those memos?
That is correct, sir.
But perhaps I could just take you to those memos. If I could ask you to go to forming. Bundle BB 2.1 D. And could I ask you please to turn to page, the right-hand side, PSV 1283. Yeah, 1283. There's a series, there's 4 memos, but yeah, but it's just the 1283 deals with coal. And you confirm that that's a memorandum from yourself to Brian Malefe.
That is correct.
And I'm not going to take you to all of them because I don't think this is contentious, but there's similar memos, Mr. Singh, in relation to each of the projects, correct?
That is correct.
And it was upon the adoption of these memos that McKinsey were then invited to put in an RFP.
That is correct.
Have you any idea then how regiments come to be in possession of these memos?
I have no idea, sir.
And would you, like Mr. Peter, consider it highly irregular that they, on the face of 745, were in possession of them?
Yeah, that would be so, sir.
I want then to go back to where we ended off last time, and that is in relation to the question of the justifiability of the increase in the ETC. Now, what we know is that the increase was a large one. It equated to 41%, 15.9 billion in just over a year. Mr. Chabi, and we're going to come to your evidence and that of your expert, but let me just summarize it so that we locate ourselves. Chabi opines that the increase was not reasonable. According to him, an 11% increase to 42.8 billion would have been reasonable, or an 18% increase to 45.4 billion, allowing for Transnet engineering costs, would have been reasonable. Put differently, at best, on his opinion, the increase was 9 billion too high, which equates to approximately 56% too high. So you're familiar with his evidence?
That's correct.
Now, in the interest of time, Mr. Singh, what I intend to do, or what I plan to do, was to ask you really about 4 things. The first relates to the hurdle rate, the second, batch pricing, the third, cost escalation, and the fourth, contingencies. We've already dealt with the hurdle rate. I'm not going to return to that. So I'm not going to go through all the aspects of the increase. I'm going to confine myself to leading you on the batch price, the cost escalation, and the contingencies. We know that those 3 things made up, I think, just over half of the 16 billion increase. So I'm going to focus on those 3 things, if I may.
That's fine, Mr. Maibach.
Yeah, sure. Just on the issue of the hurdle rate, I don't know if that's what you wanted to address. I don't intend to go back to that. Is there anything you want to add in relation to the hurdle rate and the questioning previously?
Yes. Okay. There was, Mr. Chair, if I may, on the hurdle rate, you will recall that Mr. Maibach led some propositions in this regard at the previous hearing, and the issue was let's call it the allegation of the manipulation of the hurdle rate to justify the project. And you will recall, Mr. Chair, this was the 18.4 15.56% versus the 15.2% versus the 16.3% issue. Mr. Chair, and one of the questions that Mr. Maiberg had put to me was, do we know if the project was actually an NPV positive project at a hurdle rate of 18.56%? Because that was the official hurdle rate at which the business case was approved. Mr. Maiberg then went on to say that on approaching Mr. Chabi indicated that this would probably be a 3 to 4 week exercise to be able to understand that. Mr. Chair, that disturbed me a little bit, and then I went on to do some investigations of my own. So if we have reference to the business case, the approved business case, Mr. Chair, we will find that there is sensitivities relating to the hurdle rates and various other components. And maybe if, Chair, you would allow, maybe we can actually go to the business case and I can then demonstrate the effect of the 18.56% on the revised ETC.
Okay, let's go there. Right.
The business case found in Callard, BB4B, and at page FQC 401, 402 in fact.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. FQC 402, you said?
Yeah, I think it starts at 402.
So, Mr. Chair, you will recall that when Mr. Maiberg put this proposition to me, my first response was that the business case was prepared on a conservative basis and actually didn't include what we had termed operational efficiencies relating to the acquisition of additional locomotives. So if we had to look at the end state of the revised ETC of 55 billion and its impact on the original business case, we would then have to include these, let's say, operational efficiencies. If we go to page 20, let me just get it here and I'll give you the reference. If we have regard to FQC 423.
423.
That's correct.
Okay, and
if you then look, Mr. Chair, at the bottom of the page, you will see a heading called operational efficiencies. And then if you look at the fourth line in that paragraph, and it says, rightly and conservatively, the fleet plan does not estimate unproven potential additional operational efficiencies.
Sorry, Mr. Singh, why don't you just read into the microphone?
Oh, sorry. It, on line 4, Mr. Chair, you will see it says, rightly and conservatively, the fleet plan does not estimate unproven potential operational efficiencies that could be achieved from optimization of flows based on new technologies. And it goes on to explain what those new technologies are. So that basically confirms that the business case did not account for these operational efficiencies. Mr. Chair, if you then had to go to, I'll give you a reference now. Let me just get it here. We then had to go to, Mr. Chair, page FQC 452.
yes.
Mr. Chair, there you will see a table, and it's marked Exhibit 38.
Yes.
And then you will see, Mr. Chair, in that table, there's blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. So we're looking at the fourth block, and it is numbered 7 in a small circle, if you could see that.
Yeah.
Then if you move towards the right, Mr. Chair, you will see that there's an NPV of 2.7 billion.
Yes.
Then you will see an NPV of negative 0.8 billion.
Yes.
And then you will see a NPV of 6.3 billion.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, the relevance of these numbers is as follows. So, item 7, which is that block that I've referred you to, basically tries to understand what happens to the NPV if you have a 5% improvement in operational efficiency, or if you have a 5% decrease in operational efficiency. And it measures it against the base case NPV, which was the 2.7 billion, okay? Which was, as we know, is in the business case. And that 2.7 billion, Mr. Chair, is at the 18.56% hurdle rate. So, Mr. Chair, if you then move, as I said, the 2.7 billion is at 18.56, so that is base case. If you then have a 5% deterioration in operational efficiency as a result of the new locomotives, that 2.7 billion becomes a negative 0.8 billion, which is the second NPV number. But if you then have a 5% increase in operational efficiency, you then have a NPV of 6.3 billion, which means the 5% operational efficiency captures an additional 3.6 billion in NPV value. Now, Mr. Chair, why is this of relevance? Because you would recall that in the board memo that we submitted to them, we were fully transparent with the board to say to them that at the original hurdle rate of 18.56%, at 55 billion, the NPV would be 1.2 billion negative. So that was contained in the board memo. So what we are now saying is, if we had taken into account the operational efficiencies that the business case did not take into account, we would have had a 3.6 billion additional NPV for this table that was included in the business case, which would be more than sufficient to offset the 1.2 billion negative NPV that we disclosed to the board. So in summary, Mr. Chair, if we had to rewrite the memo to the board, we'd probably have to say that the operational efficiencies were not included in the business case and in the original NPV calculation, due to us wanting to be conservative. And we've disclosed that in the business case. Adjusting for that, you would have had a 3.5 billion rand improvement in the NPV, which would offset the negative NPV of 1.2 billion at the original 18.56% hurdle rate. So, Mr. Chair, the 15.2%, I've done some investigation regarding that as well. And the 15.2% hurdle rate, Mr. Chair, actually is not of my making, as Mr. Lehe alluded to in his affidavit. That 15.2%, Mr. Chair, was actually calculated by group financial planning, which is a function within my area at Transnet as CFO at the time. And there was a gentleman called Mr. Thabo Lebelo who was heading up that division at the time, and he alluded to the fact that there were very specific reasons as to why the 15.2% was actually calculated and shared with TFR, which was Transnet Freight Rail at the time, which was then used in arriving at the, let's call it, revised NPV. But Mr. Chair, as I've demonstrated, whether you look at the original 18.56, which is the worst case scenario, the NPV of this project would still have been positive. If you look at the 15%, it would have been even more positive. And obviously at a 16%, it would have been positive still. So at any of these hurdle rates that one would choose, the business case for the locals still was positive.
So, Mr. Singh, can I ask you to go, please, to page 727? This is the ETC memo.
7.
The same bundle, 727.
Sure.
At paragraph 80,
Just 1 second.
are you there?
7.
So it says the updated NVP results in a positive NVP of 11.68 billion at the new hurdle rate of 15.2.
Sorry, sir.
Do you-
7?
727.
720.
Now, previously you accepted that that is an error, the 15.2. It should be 16.24. Do you change your evidence now?
$727.
727.
Done there.
Paragraph 80. Previously you accepted that 15.2 was wrong and it should have been 16.24. Do you change your evidence?
Mr. Chair, on the, based on my discussions with Mr. Lebello, he has indicated that the 15.2%, according to his recollection, was approved at some point in time. But he has subsequently left Transnet, so he doesn't have access to his emails or any documentation. So he doesn't have the ability to be able to give us indications as to where this was approved.
But we've seen your policy that you signed,
Yes.
and that reflected 16.24.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So there's one error. And then you say the NVP would become negative R167 billion at the original hurdle rate of 18.56. You say that's wrong as well.
No, no. So in arriving at this,
Yeah.
we actually had full transparency with the board to say that we have at 18.56 a negative NPV.
Yeah.
Okay? So in order to deal with the proposition that this was a loss-making project, I'm suggesting
I understand that.
it's not an error.
Well, what you're saying is that it shouldn't read that. What should it read?
Mr. Chair, what we are trying to say is that if we had to compare the original 18.56, you would have a negative 1.6 billion NPV. Taking into account the fact that the business case did not accommodate the operational efficiencies that would accrue due to new equipment, if we adjust for that, you would have a positive NPV.
All right, so that should have said it was positive even at 18.56.
Yes.
So it's wrong. In one paragraph, got two errors.
I wouldn't classify them as errors.
All right, I see. But just so that you understand it, what's not dealt with in this paragraph is the officially approved by you hurdle rate of 16.24. Now, perhaps I can just put this to you and we can put in an affidavit if it's contentious. We contacted Mr. Callard to find out whether or not he could run the sums for us at the hurdle rate of 16.24%. And Mr. Callard still has access, as I understand it, to the McKinsey model. There was a model that was used in producing this kind of information. And he is unable to run those figures. He's unable to tell us what the NVB, whether it would be positive or negative, at 16.24. Apparently, it's a very big job if you don't have the model. You say it's not so.
Well, I've just done it for you.
I see. Well, what have you done?
I've demonstrated that this project is still NPV positive at 18.56.
All right.
So if you look at the 16% hurdle rate, it would be probably bigger. The NPV will be larger.
All right, Mr. Singh, so you wouldn't agree with what Mr. Callard has to say? And Mr. Chaubi, you said that I had said that it would take him 3 weeks. That was to run the 16.24. Of course, he doesn't have the same access to information, perhaps, as Mr. Callard has. But you doing a sort of a broad analysis, you come to the conclusion that it would be positive even at 18.56.
Based on the business case and the information we have, yes.
Accepting your evidence that you've given about how you interpret that table.
Well, that is the officially approved business case that was prepared by Mr.
But the point is, that's not what you told the board. You come with that version now when the concern is raised.
Well, Mr. Chair, as I said, the concern should have been raised by the board at the time when they were presented with a 1.6 billion rand negative NPV project.
The concern should have been raised by the board.
Yes.
You presented this memorandum to the board.
Yes, in full disclosure that there was a negative NPV.
Let us then, have you got anything else to say about the hurdle rate?
No, sir.
Do you have any explanation why you didn't insert in your memo your officially approved hurdle rate?
I think at this point in time, this was obviously the numbers that were run, that was included in here, was done as of the contract signing date, which was obviously the end of March. And that is why in my affidavit, we had the 3 columns which you pointed out at the end of the last session, which was the middle column, which was the 31st of March 2014.
Yes, I think we went through that.
Yes.
Have you got anything to add to that?
No.
All right. So, can I ask you to go? Perhaps we can just keep this document open to the ETC memo, as we call it, which you find at page 714.
Okay, let me just get on this.
And perhaps I could ask you to turn, because the increases are conveniently set out in a schedule or table at 718. Now, Mr. Singh, just again to summarize the position, and then we'll go into the versions. I'm now dealing with batch pricing. Okay. 2.7 billion of the 15.9 billion increase was attributable to batch pricing, arising from a reduction in batch sizes to 40% and 60%. Do you agree with that?
That is correct.
And what happened is there were 2 bidders for diesel and 2 bidders for electric locomotives, respectively. Correct?
That is correct.
And just for the assistance of for the information of the chairperson, that appears from, Mr. Chairperson, 718. You see there's a column on the right-hand side, and then to the left of the figures, you see A, B, C, D. So that's note D. It says batch pricing adjustment for reduction of batch size to 40/60%, and the cost of that, Mr. Singh, as you've confirmed, was 2.7 billion. Correct?
That is correct.
Now, what I'm going to do on each occasion is to take you to Mr. Chabi's evidence, just so that you know how I'm going to deal with it. I'll then take you to your own evidence, and insofar as your expert also deals with it, we can go to your expert's evidence, and then we'll go to Mr. Chabi's reply. So you can feel free to respond whenever you want to, but you'll certainly get an opportunity. So we'll first deal with Chabi, then with you, stroke your expert, and then Chabi's reply. You can perhaps keep this page open because you're going to come back to it. Now, Mr. Chabi, when I talk about his evidence, he produced a report that he testified about, And that you find at Exhibit BB 8 in brackets B, point 1.
BB 8.1.
BB 8 in brackets B, point 1. If you could turn, there are only one set of numbers in this bundle, to the red numbers, page 40. Now, Mr. Singh, you would appreciate, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through everything. We have your affidavits, submissions will have to be made, and the chairperson will have to decide this question on them. I'm going to highlight the things that I'd like you to deal with, and sometimes I'm going to paraphrase things. So at page 40, paragraph 9.5.11, Mr. Chabi says, sorry, 9.54.11, there are two elements to consider: batch pricing and breakpoint pricing. Bidders provided...
I'm sorry, Mr. Mybeck. I do have page 40, but the paragraphs you mentioned don't seem to be here. So maybe we've got the wrong bundle. Is it BB8B.1?
Yes, and two in the same bundle. So BB8 in brackets B.1.
Yes, and page 40 I've got, but the paragraphs I've got are 16.30, 16.31 to 33.
I think your registrar has another, another bundle for you.
Thank you. Yes, I've got it.
So at 9.54.11, Mr. Chabi says there are two elements to consider: batch pricing and breakpoint pricing. Bidders provided indications of what it would cost them in the event of contract orders being terminated. The request for proposal stated that Transnet did not expect bidders to charge for changes in quantity. In the circumstances, batch pricing should not have been taken into consideration. I've therefore not allowed for a batch adjustment cost. Then if I could ask you to go to page 45. That, incidentally, was Mr. Chabi's summary at the beginning. If you go to page 45, he then deals with this further under the heading batch adjustment cost. And he says at paragraph 10.15, the RFP in section 3.1 defined breakpoint pricing as a premature termination of a locomotive order by Transnet. It outlined the period during which break pricing would apply, which was the delivery period. I interpreted this to mean that break pricing could only apply once a contract was in place between Transnet and the OEMs. The batch price adjustment cost in the memorandum appears to be a breakpoint pricing cost. The idea behind breakpoint pricing is that financial resources would have had to be committed by the OEMs to ensure that Transnet's order from the contract stage is met. And then if you drop down to the next paragraph, the pricing schedule provided by bidders as per the RFP requirements were in respect of breakpoint pricing. Using the breakpoint pricing schedules provided by the bidders, a figure of 7.2 billion was obtained, figure that we've mentioned, assuming OEMs were contracted and orders were terminated at the point where CNR and GE had supplied 232 and 233 diesel locomotives respectively instead of 465, and BT and CR had supplied 240 and 359 electric locomotives respectively instead of 599. And then if you go over the page, at paragraph 10.17, the RFP in section 3.1, prior to requesting breakpoint pricing schedule, stated that Transnet required flexibility to exercise options including postponing, suspending or changing quantities, and that Transnet did not expect to pay a price premium to exercise this option. Transnet exercised this option when it accelerated the delivery schedule and does not appear to have paid a premium for it. I concluded that because Transnet expected to pay a price premium in the event of a premature termination of orders after contracting and not on splitting of orders prior to contracting with OEMs, the cost for splitting the orders was not warranted. So that's what Mr. Chaubi says. And perhaps I could just take you to the point that M&S makes in its report, which it makes perhaps a lot more succinctly. Could you turn, please, to the POI bundle, Exhibit BB27.
POI.
Yeah, so keep that open, Exhibit BB27. Could you turn to page 332?
Black or red? Sorry, black or red numbers?
No, black.
332.
332. So right at the foot of page 332, M&S at paragraph 4.1.11, you see batch pricing and D, that's the D in the schedule. Quite usefully, they quote for us sections 3.1 of the RFP relating to the acquisition of 465 diesel and 599 electric locomotives reads as follows, quote, Transnet requires flexibility in exercising options for the acquisition of the locomotives. These options may include suspending or postponing the delivery of the locomotives until a date later or changing quantities. Transnet, however, does not expect to pay a price premium should it exercise any of these options. You see that?
I see that.
And then they go on to say, our understanding is that this flexibility was required to enable Transnet to adjust its orders within the 7-year time frame, and therefore Transnet expected the OEMs to price this option in. We have therefore not allowed for batch pricing adjustment price in our analysis. Really on their interpretation of 3.1 of the RFP. So, Mr. Singh, can we now go to your version? And let me take you, please, to Bundle 5C. And can I ask you, please, to go to page 1452. Yes.
Black, red. Black.
Unless I tell you otherwise, they're always black.
Okay.
Yeah. And you deal with this.
Oh, Mr. Mybeck, this might be the convenient time for that 5 minutes
Thank you.
adjournment. I'm sorry about this, but I just need to fix something. We'll adjourn for 5 minutes. Can I quickly make this order too that I need to make?
Thank you,
To
Chairperson.
make an amendment so that we are done. With regard to the order that I made on 13 August 2020 in the matter of ex parte application of Isaias Petrus Leonard on behalf of those persons listed in Annexure A to the application, I wish to make the following order that amends the order that I made on that day. That order will be amended by the following paragraph, which I will say is to be read as amending that order. The paragraph reads, as follows. The affidavit or original affidavit as redacted of witness 3 may be made available to the attorneys or to the legal team representing Mr. Anoj Singh on a confidential basis. It will be made available to them by the evidence leader of the Commission in the Transnet workstream. It is recorded that witness 3 has indicated that he has no objection to this amendment of the order. Have I captured it correctly?
I think so, yes,
Yes.
Chairperson.
No, we're quite happy.
Yes. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the registrar will just, or the legal team can make sure that later on the order is printed so that it's available in hard copy.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, Mr. Singh, I think what I'm, as I discussed with you in the break, what I will do is I'll paraphrase Chabi. I'll then take you to various parts of your affidavits where you deal with the question. Maybe just give a thumbnail sketch of that and then give you the opportunity to respond. So if I could take you to page 1452, you deal with batch pricing from paragraphs 90 to 101. At paragraph 94, you say the RFP contemplated splitting. However, Transnet reserved the right not to pay a price premium for excising either the splitting or the break pricing options. At 95, I reject the finding of MNS and the opinion of Chabi regarding batch pricing for the following reasons. And you go on then to give a definition of premium. You say at paragraph 100, it is all relevant time understood that Transnet moved for price batching. The RFP contemplated a reasonable cost. Transnet never contemplated paying a zero cost for batch pricing. And then if I could take you to page 185, you deal with it again.
Paragraph.
1485. From paragraphs 233 to 239. You say at 233 that Chaubi seems to be confusing two concepts that are different. These are the concepts of batch pricing and break pricing. And then, if I could ask you to go to 1489, you deal with the subject again, paragraphs 257 at the foot of the page to 261. And again, you deal with the question of break pricing and batch pricing. Now, just so that perhaps I can just make this point. What Mr. Chaubi's evidence is it's not clear to me that he misunderstood the distinction. What he says is the 2.7 billion figure, he assumes that came from...
I'm sorry, I see Mr. Singh, you seem to have run out of space for the files there. Do you want some to be put behind you? Or will you manage?
I think these are relevant to...
Oh, for now.
for
Okay,
now, yes.
okay, all right.
So as I understood his evidence, he was saying, well, you could do the sums, and the 2.7 million related to break pricing. So essentially, though, it seems that the controversy relates to this paragraph or section 3.1 in the RFP, which has been quoted. There's a whole lot of other things said, but what is your response to that?
I think, Mr. Chair, for us to navigate through the issue of batch pricing, I think it's important for us to understand the reasoning behind the need for, let's call it, the splitting. And for that, Mr. Chair, we probably need to reference the business case, and that will give a background behind why we needed to split in the first place. And we can then take it from there and run it forward until we actually incur the cost.
Sorry, could I just say this insofar as it's in the interest of time? From the legal team's point of view, we take no issue with the decision to split. It's really the issue of the cost in relation to that, because we know that the decision to split, that was authorized by, I think, the BADC and the board. And in fact, I think you correctly point out that even Fundutsi finds that there's nothing necessarily irregular about that.
Yes.
It's the question of cost that I would like to direct you to in particular, and it's the fact that it added on the 2.7 billion. So I don't want to prevent you from going to the business case if you want to, but we don't take any issue with the splitting per se, it's the cost.
Okay. Mr. Chair, in summary, okay, the reason or the rationale for splitting emanated from the risk that was included in the business case. If I recall, on page 8 and 48 of the business case, there was the business case identified a shortfall of about 50 million tons and 150 locomotives. The business case further identified, Mr. Chair, the fact that in order to mitigate this risk that was identified, that no more than 2 OEMs per locomotive type will be awarded the contract to supply the locomotives. That is recorded in the business. And we can go to it, but in the interest of time, probably we can take it at face value for now. But it is recorded, Mr. Chair. And, Mr. Chair, the business case further goes on to actually identify the impact that this splitting will have on the total cost of ownership of the electric locomotives and the diesel locomotives. And the business case identifies that there is a bigger impact on the electric locomotives rather than the diesel locomotives in terms of the splitting. The business case further then, in the procurement strategy of the business case section, identifies again the fact that we would need to split the award. And I know Mr. Myberg is interested in the cost, but in order to understand the cost, we need to understand the build-up to why that cost actually was incurred. And this is the reasons, therefore, is contained in the business case, as I've just explained. The RFP, Mr. Chair, as quite correctly pointed out, does contemplate these three options: splitting, breaking, and terminating. It does contemplate the fact that we said we will not expect to pay a price premium. As we've mentioned already, that, in my understanding, does not mean we're not paying anything. It means that we will pay something, but a reasonable cost. Mr. Chair, in terms of the, I've dealt with the RFP, I've dealt with the business case. Mr. Chair, as Mr. Heiberg has already alluded to the fact, the board was fully aware of the fact that the splitting, they actually approved the splitting. The BADC at its meeting on the 24th of February, I think it was, or 26th of February, were given the financial implications of the splitting, being the 2.7 billion number that we talked about. So the board was aware of that before we had actually signed the contract. The Kunduzi report, as we said, also concurs that the splitting was allowed by the RFP. And in actual fact, they actually go on to say that the splitting was actually allowed for by the PPM, or the Procurement Procedures Manual of Transnet, and therefore didn't find anything untoward into it. They actually went on further to say that the splitting of the award actually went on to save Transnet some 660 million, Mr. Chair. So from that perspective, Mr. Chair, if you look at all of these things that I've outlined, it's just a matter of consequence. The 2.7 billion was a consequence of all of these decisions that had been taken up to that point in time.
So I just want to correct one thing. The rationale is understood, and the fact that I think the procedure manual allows for the splitting. I just must correct myself. There is an issue around the procedure in this regard. You know that Mr. Leher raised it with you. I'll come to his evidence in a moment. But so as I understand what you're saying, it's you accept that the RFP said that Transnet doesn't expect to pay a price premium. You saying, well, that we didn't pay a premium.
Yes.
You can't expect to pay nothing.
Yes.
It's really a fight about premium.
Exactly.
Okay. So can I take you to Mr. Chaubi's response to you, and then I'll give you another chance to respond. You find his response at page 1827.
Which one's
That's your bundle 5C.
18.
I beg your pardon, 1827, not 57. Are you there?
Yes.
Now, what Mr. Chaubi says is he quotes at 64 and 65 the RFPs. And the words that Transnet, however, does not expect to pay a price premium. You see that in the quotations in 64 and 65. Then he says at 66, Mr. Singh is therefore not correct in submitting that Transnet reserved the right not to pay a price premium for exercising the change in quantities, splitting or break pricing options. At 67, he says, in line with the definition of a price premium noted by Mr. Singh, I submit the following. He says, the benchmark or ordinary price in question as per table 2 of the memorandum on the increase in ETC, we know what the memo is, labelled best and final offer per board submission, excluding hedging and escalation, circa 29.4 billion. Then sub 2, the price premium or sum added to the ordinary price above, charged to Transnet for changing quantities as per table 2 of the 1064 memorandum, labelled batch pricing adjustment or reduction of batch size to 40/60%, was circa 2.8 billion. In percentage terms, this represents approximately 9% of the benchmark relative price benchmark or relative price of 29.4 billion. At 68, Mr. Singh's submission that Transnet never contemplated paying a zero price premium for changing quantities is therefore unfounded. Do you have anything to add to this or to what you've already said?
No, Mr. Chair. I think in terms of we can continue splitting hairs about price premium and reasonableness of the price premium. Mr. Chair, it is a fundamental and accepted commercial basis that fewer items of something cost more than a larger quantity of the same item. So if you buy 1,000 of something, it costs you per unit less than if you buy 10 of it. That is the concept that we're actually discussing here. The issue that, the fact that this quantum was contemplated in the business case, there was a rationale put forward for it in the business case, there was contemplated in the RFP. The board exercised the option, understanding that there was going to be a financial consequence to the fact that this option was exercised. That quantum has been quantified at 2.7 billion. And Mr. Chair, the reason why this 2.7 appears in the reconciliation to the board is because, notwithstanding the fact that the business case contemplated, as I've outlined, all of the issues relating to batching and the consequences of batching, it did not quantify a value for batching. So it contemplated the act of batching, but it did not include a value for batching, because it did not know. When the business case was drafted by Mr. Keller, there was no way of quantifying that, exercising that option. And therefore, the RFP was prepared in such a way that if we needed to assess this exercising of the option, there would be sufficient information available from the tenderers to be able to identify and quantify what this impact would be. And that is why the RFP was structured in a manner that requested this information from the OEM.
Chairperson, I see it is just past 1 o'clock.
We can do one of two things in recognition of the stop-start for which I'm responsible this morning. From my point of view, if it's convenient to continue maybe until 1:30, we can do so. But if we may as well stop at 1 and then continue at 2, that's fine also. So I'm just checking with you in terms of what you have.
I certainly would value the opportunity to see if I can carry on at least for another half an hour to see if I can at least finish this and maybe another topic.
Yes, I think there should be no objection. Yeah, let's continue. Yeah.
All right. So what do the words price premium mean? I mean, I understand what you say, but when it says that the RFP, that Transnet, however, does not expect to pay a price premium, what was contemplated there as far as you're concerned? What was it not expected to do?
Well, it was certainly not expected to not pay anything, because as I've said, it's a normally commercially acceptable principle that if you're buying 1,000 of something, it would probably...
But then what do those words mean, Mr. Singh? That's, I think, what I'm getting at. I understand your position, but what do the words mean?
It would mean that we have to pay something.
Well, precisely. It said it doesn't expect to pay anything. It doesn't expect to pay a premium.
Yes, which means we would be expecting to pay something, but not excessive.
So is that your interpretation?
Yes.
You would pay something, but not excessive.
Yes.
Now, I mentioned to you the evidence of Mr. Lahir. Again, in the interest of time, I can take you to his affidavit. I can even take you to a transcript, which you've probably seen. I mean, to paraphrase, during the course of the negotiations, you would have seen that Mr. Leher raised with you, and I think Mr. Gianni, his concern about this. And in particular, he said, well, look, if we're going to split these batches, shouldn't we have done this, and shouldn't we even go out to tender again? Because there might be some people who could actually meet the same price on a reduced batch. You recall that concern being raised by Mr. Leher?
No.
Okay. Let me take you to his...
I'm aware of his affidavit, and I know what he said. But
okay, so you say that didn't happen?
No.
Okay. Well, then I need to take you to portions of it, so
yeah, sure.
you can comment on it. Let's go to BB4F. Where you'll find this is in Transnet Bundle 4A. Are you there? Transnet Bundle 4A? No.
Not BB4.
No. So it's Transnet Bundle 4A, not BB4A.
Oh.
So it's one of the latter files.
Okay. I'm there, sir.
So this is a file that's got a number of dividers. Can I take you to the last divider?
Yeah,
That's
that's
BB4F.
Yes.
Are you there? Okay. And can I ask you please to go to page YIL14? That's on the right, and on the left-hand side we can perhaps stick with, it's 234. Are you there?
No, I'm there.
So at 51, Mr. Leher says, during one caucus, I raised with Singh and Gianni the issue of the original bid price per unit must be retained by bidders, even though the batch sizes were reduced. I pointed out that if not, it would mean that their prices may be higher than the other unsuccessful bidders who could have given lower prices for a smaller batch. Singh and Gianni disagreed, and Gianni said that the bidders were not evaluated on smaller batch sizes. He said all bidders were requested to provide breakpoint pricing and were not evaluated on smaller batch pricing, and that no bidders provided pricing for a smaller batch. And at 52, during the same caucus, I also asked Mr. Singh and Gianni whether TRF should not have gone out to all bidders pre-award to ask for a price based on a 50% batch. Mr. Gianni responded that it wasn't known that a batch size would be 50%, and he then refers to the recording. Do you accept that Mr. Leher raised these concerns or queries?
No.
All right.
So you're saying, no, you don't accept that he did raise these concerns?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Okay.
Then let me take you to the next file. This is Transnet Bundle 4B. So Transnet Bundle 4B, it should be wherever you pulled out this file, it's the next one. So it's Transnet Bundle 4, and you had pulled out A. This time you must pull out little b. Could you turn to page 736, please? So, and let me direct your attention to paragraph 17. This is another affidavit by Mr. Leher. In addition to the evidence presented in my main statement.
So this 736.
Yes.
736, paragraph 17.
I've got an FQC, is that right?
It's the left-hand number,
Yeah.
736. Have you got an FQC file? That's a CALOD file. What you need to do is there's a series of dividers.
Yeah.
You must go to the divider 4F3. But this file is consecutively paginated, so you should, if you're in the right file, be able to find a page 736.
The bundle
Sorry, this is Exhibit BB.
bundle 4B.
No.
4B.
Now you're in BB 4B, you want to be in bundle 4B.
Where are we again, sir?
Okay, 736. Are you there? Paragraph 17.
Yes.
It says, Mr. Leher, in addition to the evidence presented in my main statement under this heading in paras 51 and 52, which I read to you, I'd like to add that during a caucus on 7 February 2014, I raised with Messrs. Singh and Gianni that we had not communicated to the bidders that the pricing per unit must remain the same. That we had communicated to the bidders that the pricing per unit must remain the same, albeit that the batch sizes had been reduced. I pointed out to them that it was important to retain the price because the mandate required the same price. Do you recall Mr. Leher having raised that or not?
Mr. Chair, he did not.
Well, then if I can take you please to, you'll see at paragraph 18, Mr. Leher refers to the fact that Mr. Callard had put up a transcript of the discussion in question. Now, that transcript you find at page, unfortunately it's in the same file, at page 914. Are you there?
914.
So 914, the transcript headed negotiation team meeting at Transnet on 7 February, extract from video recording. You'll see present included Mr. Leher and yourself and Mr. Gianni. Do you see that?
Yes,
Now,
I'm sorry, your answer was not audible, Mr. Singh.
I'm sorry, sir. I am at the page. Yes, I see.
Yeah, okay. And you do see that according to that page, you were present?
Yes.
Okay.
so let me take you to page 916 and let me ask you to have a look at line 7, the right-hand side. This is Mr. Leher. Now that we are reducing the batches by 50%, we want the same price. And if we don't keep the price, then we got a big problem, a sort of deal breaker. So Mr. Leher raises that issue, doesn't he? Well, I take it you will accept it. You've read this transcript, Mr. Singh?
No.
Okay, well then let me take you through. All right. So at line 8, I'll read again. On the right-hand side, now that we are reducing the batches to 50%, we want the same price. And if we don't keep the same price, then we've got a big problem, a sort of deal breaker. You say, well, I would have had a problem from her for obvious reasons. And our mandate says we must get it, must get rid of this batch pricing because we must get the same price. I hope Brian has not signed off on it yet. You say, we have not given it to him. Sorry, we have not given it to him. Hey. Gianni, no, I don't think, but that is just a wish, you know. In fact, some would be laughing you off and think you're smoking something. Mr. Leher, yeah, but you see, we have a big issue then. Because if we don't get that, sorry, Tabby, if we don't get that price, some, and then you go over the page to 917, Mr. Leher carries on at line 9. The issue we have around that, and it now comes back to evaluations because they provided us, if we have to go back on it, it is critical that they give us the right price because if it is not, some of the other bidders give us a better price on a smaller batch. So do you see that Mr. Leher raises these issues that he set out in his affidavit? And then Mr. Gianni says, no, but Yusuf, we've never had batches, and I think we must not confuse this thing. And so it goes on. And then if you go to page 918, and if you look at line 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, Mr. Leher, just a question. Should we not have gone pre-award back to all bidders and said for 80% give us a price? And Mr. Leher gave evidence about this transcript, and to the best of my knowledge, he said that should be 50%.
Where is it? Where are you?
At line 15.
915.
15, yeah, page 918. So on the face of it, Mr. Leher appears to have raised these issues with you. Would you agree?
It would seem like so.
So do you have any comment on his concerns?
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Leher.
Mr. Singh, sorry, won't you just speak into the microphone, please?
Sorry.
I know it's difficult because you're looking at the files at the same time. I understand that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. In response to this, Mr. Leher is raising issues that relate to procurement, in that we should have, I would assume, the point he's trying to make is that we should have given everybody the opportunity to have bid on an equal footing if we're now reducing the batch size. And Mr. Chair, Mr. Gianni was the, how could I call it, the procurement subject matter expert that was from TFR at the time. He had run the procurement process up to that point in time, and we would have taken our cue from him in terms of this matter. In addition to that, Mr. Chair, Mr. Leher, having made or had the concerns that he had, still continued with the negotiation process. Went through the process, received the prices, received the break price input from the OEMs, which was quantified at the 2.7 billion that we have just discussed, and accepted the same eventually. And also participated in the BADC discussions on the 24th of February when these matters were discussed. and didn't raise any of these concerns at that stage either.
But what do you make of the content of his concerns? I mean, what his evidence was is he raised it with you. He got a sense that you and Gianni both didn't agree with him. And he considered you senior people. That was the thrust of his evidence. What is your comment to the merits of his objection?
Mr. Chair, as I've said, I think the main issue that Mr. Lehe was raising was an issue of fairness in terms of procurement. And as I said, I would have deferred to Mr. Gianni at the time in terms of whatever his view was in relation to the fairness of the procurement process, because that was his area of expertise. In terms of the issue of the quantum of batch pricing, I think Mr. Gianni even goes on to say that in the transcripts you will see that he says that we gave an instruction to say we would rather not have an impact of break pricing. But as I've explained already, Mr. Chair, the business case and the RFP contemplated a cost associated with batching and splitting. Our going in position into the negotiations was that we would like not to incur a cost, and that is always your going in position in a negotiation. You would probably never end up getting a zero cost because, as I said, commercially it would not be viable for the bidders to bid on 1,000 locomotives and still supply you the same 1,000 locomotives on a different batch size. Commercially, it would just not make sense for them. They would have to recoup that cost in some way, shape, or form. And Mr. Gianni basically actually says that. I think to the extent that he says, it would be difficult for us to achieve that, and in some cases, maybe someone will think that you're actually smoking your socks.
Then let me deal with the next issue, and that is cost escalation. So if we go back to the schedule that is attached to the ETC increase memo, and this is at bundle BB4B, you'll see that schedule or table
Sorry, just give me the page again.
BB4B. Okay, so this is the Callard file,
Callard.
one of the original ones.
FQC.
718.
I'm there.
You will see from that table that marginal letter E or note E reflects that cost to fix escalation to end of contract, that accounted for 6.7 billion of the 16 billion odd increase, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Now, let me take you to Mr. Chaubi's evidence. This you find in Exhibit BB8B.
I'm listening.
And he deals with this at page 46. He says at
I'm
10.19.
sorry, Mr. Maybeck. What is the bundle?
The bundle is BB8 in brackets B.1.
Okay, and
It's
the
marked
page?
on the spine Chowby.
Yes. And on the page,
The page, this bundle only has the red numbering,
Yes.
Chairperson.
Yes.
It's red number page 46.
Okay, I'm there.
So what Mr. Chowby says by way of summary at paragraph 10.19 is this cost item is marked E in table 2 of the memo, which we've dealt with. The computation of this cost relied on the accelerated delivery schedule as per table 1 of the memo. The result of 3.5 billion led us to conclude that this cost was overestimated by approximately 3.2 billion. And perhaps I can just take you, before we break, to paragraph 10.21, which seems to be key to Mr. Chowby's opinion. He says the South African Reserve Bank, through its Monetary Policy Committee, in achieving its primary purposes of ensuring price stability, adjusts interest rates to achieve its inflation target of 3 to 6%. Our model assumes the upper bound of this target going forward. Likewise, in the United States, and he deals with this because the OEMs, they had local and foreign content. Likewise, in the United States, the Federal Open Market Committee set an inflation target of 2%, a target to which the US Federal Open Market Committee had been struggling to raise inflation since the 2008 financial crisis. Considering this, I considered future inflation assumptions as at March 2014 of 6% locally and 2% internationally to be reasonably conservative. And then at paragraph 10.23, he says paragraph 58 of the memorandum notes that a forward-looking inflation assumption of 6% per year, in brackets 18.54% over 3.5 years, close brackets, is appropriate, and that there should be no question over the 16.8% escalation applied. The concern here is that a rate of 7.35% per year, as opposed to 6% per year, is needed to arrive at an escalation cost of 6.7 billion. You see that?
See that?
Now, if I could take you then, please, to what you say in response to that. And this you find in Bundle 5C. At page 1492.
Is it 1412?
1492.
92.
Chairperson, I see it is now 1:30.
Yes, do you want to complete the particular question, or?
I'm now going to take Mr. Singh to his version, so
Yes.
it's not it's a convenient time to break if it is.
All right, let's take the lunch break then. We'll resume at 2:30.